Hello, everyone. I'm Aude POMMERET. I'm a teacher in economics at Aude Mont Blanc and dealing with strategy. The barometer DNSA of 2023 has stated that 1 in 3 Frenchman was willing and in favor of the construction of new nuclear factories. We also have the taxonomy that decided to have nuclear power in the green energies. It seems that all conditions are met to have a debate, a real reflection, a real economic reflection on nuclear energy and the alternative solutions to nuclear energy and nuclear power. If we listen to those that are in favor of nuclear power, what are the arguments that are going to be raised? If we say that it's not emitting any CO2, for instance, and that it would allow to have energy independence that's highly desired by the French people. We've had a survey, IFOP and RTE, that show that. So the partisans of nuclear power say we have energy independence, there's no emission of CO2, we should go towards nuclear power. Those that are against, they say that it's very costly. And it's true that if we see Flamanville, if we see how much it costs to process the radioactive waste, we could think about it. It costs very much. But also, if we take into account the fact that we have potentially some safety problems that may not be that serious, but we saw that we could have maintenance problems with nuclear power. So those that are against would say, let's not think about it further. It costs too much. There are safety issues that could occur on top of that. So it's obvious we shouldn't go for nuclear power enhancement. So what is lacking is an economic reflection to weigh them out, to see what's the cost and benefit ratio between all these arguments to decide whether or not it's a good thing to have nuclear power. And actually, it's more complicated than that, because we shouldn't consider nuclear power on its own, saying it's no good or it's good. We should actually talk about alternative solutions. We agree, not emitting CO2. It is mandatory. So we would eliminate any type of other alternatives. It's solutions that would be only renewable energies. And we wondered about the optimal mix of energies between nuclear power that I just described and renewable energies, which is very attractive. However, probably we'll have to think in details about that to see the consequences for the biodiversity or in terms of use of critical materials. Once we've done this overview and we've looked at the ins and outs of everything, we'll have a reflection that is very complicated. But in my opinion, it's hard to do savings. We have to reconcile energy mix. But I'm delighted to be able to debate this with the wonderful guests that we have on this stage today. Thank you, Aude. Hello, everyone. In 2 seconds, I will introduce the speakers of today. We're lucky to have a panel that is really at the heart of the current news, not especially for the recent campaign. We talk a lot about energy in terms of pricing. So it would be interesting to go back to that today. I raised a question. If we really want to go towards a reconciliation of energy choices, we will have the opportunity to explore that in our discussions. And I would like to introduce the speakers that may say a few words on their field of expertise. We have Xavier BARBARO, who's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Neoen, Laurent GERMAIN, who's the CEO of Aegis, Nicolas, CEO of Edison, and Flora Gebali, who's the President of Coalitions and the author of a book called Le Syndrome de la Phobie. You have the floor, Xavier. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Aude. I'm not into nuclear, but I will not take the position of being against nuclear power because that would not correspond. We do renewable energy, solar, wind power, storage. We do it in France, in other countries, in Australia, in Finland, in Canada. in Argentina. It's quite interesting, actually, because it gives us an observation post about what's happening elsewhere abroad. Sometimes things go less well than in France, and there is a lack of consensus somewhere. There are energy choices that are difficult to reconcile in France, but it's also the case elsewhere. In Calgary, for instance, in the province of Alberta in Canada, on the road to the airport, there were big boards where it said, "I love oil and gas," which was a way to take a standing against Trudeau, the first federal minister who was standing against us. And also, for some, coal would be tantamount to hitting on nuclear power. We meet this everywhere, but this has been exacerbated in France over the last weeks and months. It is an interesting subject. It is an important subject, and the population and political decision makers should take an interest in it. However, we should go towards reconciliation because energy projects take time to develop. A solar project is 5 years, wind farm is 10, and nuclear power is 15. So then afterwards it would be operated up to 80 years. So the choices that we make will commit us, will bind us for our children, will bind our children and grandchildren. So we need to converge because it costs a lot of money. It's important, and our decisions will have an impact over the long term. And as a nation, as a continent, we need to know where we want to go. It concerns also our neighbors because there's a link which is not that of a country, which is probably that of a continent because there are interconnections, there are energy markets that we share, and we should avoid chaos. Just to set the scene of the value of renewable energies that are embodied today, and for this session, we have renewable electrons that are intermittent. We have batteries that are not very costly. Solar, wind farm. Unanimously, it is acknowledged as the less costly source of energy in Europe, less than nuclear power. We can have important volumes with green electrons at a low cost, intensive ones. In UN, we provide electricity to Google, to SNCF, to other energy suppliers into the tune of 40, 60 euros per gigawatt hour. These are the prices that EDF can try to sell the electron-intensive energies. That's public information. This is 110 euros. So it's important to have this figure in mind to start with. And the energy that we produce benefits in a strong way because it's local. It's not imported. And when we import Chinese equipment, American, facilities will produce made in France energy, so it creates sovereignty. Even if we have foreign facilities, we have to bear in mind that it generates interesting income for the farmers, for the communities of communes, for our outsourcers, for solar energy. Even with 100% of Chinese panels, we have energy produced for Bouygues and so on. That's the debate and the scene as it should be set. Renewable energy doesn't cost a lot of money. It's important volumes at the right time. We couldn't have overcome the crisis of winter 22-23 without wind farms because it generated a lot of electricity at the right time. And it's an energy and electricity that has a local and French component that is quite strong. That's the scene. It doesn't make us adverse to nuclear power, but it can be built quite quickly. So the permitting goes a long way, but it's done in 6 to 12 months, which is also an important element to keep in mind. Thank you, Xavier. Laurent? I think that the title of this session is quite paradoxical because with RTE, there was a publication in February 2022. It was like a peace treaty between nuclear energy and renewable energies, because if we want to be at a carbon-free, we want to meet the expectations in terms of carbon-free society, we have to work on nuclear power and renewable energies. We shouldn't pit them against one another. And I think that this objectivization has pacified the debate and has made sure that this was reinforced by sovereignty issue in terms of energy that arose in a strong manner over the last years. And this has supported the central scenario of RTE, which is it's a crystal clear project, namely to have 6 EPR and 8 new in a quick manner, with having one in Upperly by 2035, and also to multiply wind farms to have 4,000 of them in the same horizon, and also to multiply by 7 the volume of solar panels. So the reconciliation of energy mix has taken place. I don't think that it is that we should wage a new war on that subject. But then, between nuclear power and renewable energies, we are not talking about the same reaction. We have a real French excellence that we can export, where we can create jobs relating to that French expertise. And the first World Summit on Energy that took place in March 2024 forecasted a growth of energy, of nuclear energy, by threefold. And that allows France to position itself to create jobs and to create also a nuclear industry in France, and to have an impact, and we'll talk about it, on the pricing of energy. Thank you. Nicolas?
To everybody. I'll try to give you a picture of how we see the energy transition from Italy. So the Italian perspective and the Italian market, the energy market is very much different from the French one. Realizing that the energy transition is much more complicated than what was envisaged at the beginning. So it's not simply the fact of creating incentives and regulations to invest in renewables, because renewables are not enough. They are giving a great contribution to decarbonization, but they are interruptible. And our energy system is not ready to absorb an heavy portion of renewables intermittents into the system without additional investments, for instance, in energy storage. So we have a plan in Italy to more than double renewables that currently are installed, but the plan at 2030 was not combined with the plan to associate storage investments. Storage are batteries, storage are pump and storage plants. So besides the fact that we need storage, we also need to address new investment in order to give somehow a return to the domestic industry. So running huge investments, and Italy has to invest from here to the end of the decade 350 billion euros for the energy transition. I think France is probably in a similar situation, and I'm not talking about nuclear, because we have opened the debate on return on nuclear in Italy, but there is something happening for the next decade. So we have realized the complication and also the difference in which the different countries are managing the energy transition. If I see at electricity spot prices in Europe today, Italy has a spot price of 110 euro per megawatt hour, France 30. But these 30 euro per megawatt hour in France, the right price to give the right signal to allow investments in new nuclear capacity or even in new renewable capacity or in storage capacity? No, it is not. If I look at the situation in Spain, prices are going to zero, spot prices, for a certain number of hours during the day, because there's an excess capacity of PV production, and the country has not invested enough in energy storage. Is it the right market model? It is not. I can make another example of Germany. A month ago in Germany, for 2 days, spot prices went up to 9,999 euro per megawatt hour, because there was an unfortunate event in which there was no sun and no wind for a couple of days and was not predicted. So is it the right signal to the market? They have burned hundreds of millions in a couple of days. So again, different marketplaces, different regulations. We need a direction and a better planning from Europe in order to run in a sustainable way the energy transition, and we are pretty far from that.
Thanks very much. Et Flora? Bonjour à toutes et tous.
Hello, everyone. If reconciliation of energy mix has been talked about in the RTE report, it hasn't been known by the French public. Many of them is opposed to nuclear power. There are political powers that have not found reconciliation on the subject matter of energy. Energy reconciliation could work, in my opinion, if we get out of the binary debate, which is for or against nuclear power. Whatever position we take, the impression is that we are for or against when there are obvious arguments on both sides. The German model was an argument against those that are adverse to nuclear power, for instance, that would undermine this position. But if we have a more global overview of the protection of the environment, we could see also the problems relating to water. It takes up 1/3 of of fresh water in France. And also, what about the slowness of energy transition? We need 10 to 20 years to build a nuclear power plant. And we would need to have 1 reactor per week for 30 years if we are to be autonomous. So if we can't get out of this debate for or against nuclear power, I don't think that we could reach an energy reconciliation standing. Another thing also is that reconciliation in terms of energy cannot work if we do not have an ecological reconciliation today. There is something that is quite practical. It's actually the carbon footprint, where companies could seize themselves of the subject because it could get into spreadsheets. It's quite reducing in terms of scope on ecology, because when we are in favor of nuclear power, we don't often hear about water, but water is one of the biggest issues and is going to be the subject matter of a huge crisis looming upon us. And then also, how about biodiversity? The energy issue can only be solved if we do changes that are not technical, but are rather cultural. And it is difficult to hear. And the carbon footprint, which is easy to resort to, but it can be also an undermining factor because it's unsatisfactory. I talked about the end syndrome, because if we don't change the way in which we work, we will not manage to solve this ecological question. And the way in which we address the energy question nowadays, that actually resonates to the codes of the industrial economy era codes. Another way to find reconciliation is to accept that the energy issue is just a small part of the ecological question, which is rather holistic. It needs to be taken as a whole. And it requires from us to change, as individuals, as a society, to have a cultural change. And shouldn't we not do that, we would look at it from the prism of the industry, and we would only see the tree instead of the whole forest. And what also is very important by far, in my opinion, energy reconciliation could not occur without political reconciliation. For 20 years, Zygmunt Bauman has made a theory on the liquid society. Liquid society is where we believe in everything and nothing. There's a lot of lack of safety that is growing. There's an instability of models. We change opinions, we change regulations, we change culture, we change opinion. And we have seen how energy transition is the victim of this liquid society. And we can see how this lack of safety due to the liquid society leads to political arguments that are there to reassure the population without having solutions that are tangible on ecology and relevant. When Pompidou and Mesmer in the 70s set up the nuclear strategy that is still the energy model today, there's no Twitter at the time. And it changed everything. And also, when we looked into the Le Monde newspaper archives, we see all this construction of this energy strategy, how it covers the debate. It's one time a day. We can debate at every minute of the day on this subject now with Le Monde, and it's also expert journalists that, as time flies, they can give arguments to the population so that they can make their own minds. Here we have a liquid society where we have hyper-information with the social networks, with everything. And that participates to a liquidity of political action where we cannot build a model of energy planification. Energy planification is a mix. It's a reconciliation. I will wrap up like this. That's energy mix. We should know what we have to keep with the nuclear power that we have and how we can develop for the future, because there's something in which I don't believe. That's the notion of transition. Transition, I don't know what it means. However, supply on an economic market that would be supported by Europe and with having a functional effect on companies could work. I wrap up quickly. I imagine that there's a lot of publicists here that have this talent to talk about it, to have a narrative around energy. We should never dissociate nuclear power from sobriety, from frugality. It doesn't mean that we should become Hamishes. It means that we should know how to approach energy in the 20th century. Thank you to all of you. I would like to go back to these controversies on nuclear power, and I was struck by what Laurent said, who talked about a peace treaty. That's a consensus which, according to you, arose. What does it mean for you? Because we're still at the heart of a debate. We have nuclear power, but it's quite recent. We don't know if it's going to be sustainable, if the foundations have been laid for this. Why are you saying this? Well, the strategy that has been set up and rolled out, the 6 EPRs, they are actually seeing light now. There are studies that are being carried out as we speak. And there's a timing of achievement of the nuclear plants that is clear, with a commissioning in 2035, because as Florence has said, the idea is not to reinvent the wheel and not to redo against the same thing. The price of electricity is closely linked to the speed of execution of these plants. And if we do it in 70 months instead of 120 months, that will change. The industrial organization will change to have EPRs in a short duration of time, and also a lot of replicability, because this is how we can decrease the cost of the future plants. And in terms of renewable energies, the vote on the speeding up of renewable energies was done in 2023. And from my viewpoint, it did not generate any revolt, any rebellion from the French people. So the lack of competition between renewable energies and nuclear power is going on, is taking place, and we should applaud that. And we should not question the strategy, because what creates something, a debate that would be not productive, is to change strategy every 3 days. So the strategy is crystal clear. It is based on facts that are very robust, and we just need to roll out the strategy and not question it anymore.
Quels ingrédients est-ce qu'il nous faut pour ça?
What ingredients do we need? Do we need political stability within France, but also the European fora? I'm asking the question also to your colleagues. I think that everybody wants to have more stability so that the foundations are healthy and we can have a reconciliation in terms of choices. Nuclear power was no debate before, and then it started to be controversial. We closed Fessenheim, and then we saw that we needed nuclear power sovereignty and energy sovereignty, and it was actually very puzzling. I've been in the wind farm industry sector for quite some time. I was told at one point that they had to be regrouped, and then I was told that they needed to be scattered away, and there's a stop-and-go tendency which is really upsetting. We've seen the harmful effects of what we've known in France, which with the speeding up of renewable energies. What we want to say to the state is they should interfere less in energy policy, because every time it's like an elephant in the room. We lose time, we waste time. We need alignment. We need something that is more straightforward and more consistent. I'm not saying that this subject is easy. We shouldn't oversimplify. It is complicated indeed, but we live in a world, to use Flora's words, where the state brings more liquidity in the wrong sense of the word, when we need consistency. We have the right ingredients. Let's talk about what is positive. We have the know-how. We have a good level of acceptability. 50% of people are in favor of nuclear power. I don't know if they're ready to have it nearby their homes, but there's always this syndrome where they say, not in my garden, especially for wind farms, for solar panels, for nuclear power. But people understand that we're going towards a more electric world, where we need to be sovereign in our energy supply. We've seen what has happened with Russia and Ukraine. And there's also the fact that we're more acquainted, we're more familiar with wind farms and solar panels. It's more accepted. So the know-how and the acceptance and the capitals and the space, because we have enough room to have facilities, that means that we can have a high-quality energy mix. And that means that's an ingredient for sovereignty, but also to become competitive and to be resilient as well. Because in certain way, nuclear power doesn't always work perfectly sometimes. And we've seen it during winter 2022, where half of the park is decommissioned, it's out of service, it doesn't work. Depends on demand. In France, we have hydropower. So that actually helps us as well. But in France, we can have more nuclear power, more renewable energies, more energy independence, the capacity to accept additional investments as well, because we have data center that will mushroom as well. So we have the right setup. We have the right launchpad for this. But we need to make sure that the political decision makers are in the equation as well, because they are the ones that sometimes make sure that we have a liquid society and have a stop-and-go policy when we need consistency. So we need some institutional foundations, but there's also an institutional stability. We talked about organic. We said, is organic good for us? It's YouTube is the television for those under 40 years. They don't watch the standard TV anymore. In the first 3 videos that the search engine would offer, there were fake news. So I imagine that today it's the same, because with this liquidity, things change so much that wind farm has bad reputation, then very good reputation. We talk about offshore wind farms. It moves, it changes so quickly. There's a lot of fake news inside. There's a matter of stability as to information, but there's also the question of stability, of economic stability, because I'm sorry, but today it is at the very heart of society, not because we have debates on technical questions, but because French people debate because they have nothing to have heating for. We need to heat themselves. 10 to 15% of French people would lower the heating by to 15 degrees during the winter, and they find it hard to pay their bills. Today, irrespective of the crisis that we need to address, be it an energy crisis, the school, the hospital crisis, we reach the same outcome. That's actually an explosion of inequalities. And if we can't solve the crisis as a whole, look at it as a whole, we will never solve anything, and we will continue to have institutional instability, such that we offer governance going in one direction and then another direction, where we have a liquid society where we don't move forward with the climate crisis that we know. So if we don't decrease the inequalities, we will not be able to solve the political crisis, because it remains a macro issue. The politics is all about how can we live together.
Well, Nicolas, I think you wanted to say something, or Aude? And then after that, we can perhaps look at beyond the French borders. Yeah, I wanted to come back on the consequences for inequality. If we don't have acceptability, there will be no energy transition. That really is a hurdle. And we have to guarantee acceptability if we hope to do anything. But that does not mean that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can consider that a carbon footprint, it might be is necessary but not enough, and it enables us to quantify our carbon emissions so that businesses can then put a price on carbon, and then we can help them to internalize the cost. And it would be even better if we had a carbon tax. That means that you pay exactly what you should. We've also got many, many initiatives that are focusing on ecology. We're starting now to see that biodiversity is the new climate. And in the public arena, we see zero net soil artificialization, which is being recognized there. So that's a constraint which exists here in France. And there's that debate, which is up and running. And businesses are also taking into account, when they can, well, some of them do anyway, in their treble accounting system. So what is the next phase? I think we're trying to... We realize that the climate isn't the only thing. There's a lot of interaction between biodiversity and climate. My final point is that, yes, cultural change would be very practical, in fact. So if we all think differently and spontaneously we're internalizing all of our externalizations, that would be really great. But the question is, how can we achieve that? For the time being, we're trying to take steps. They're not big enough, but there's no reason. If we leave individuals without guiding them, if we allow them to provide a carbon tax and then develop that for biodiversity or other aspects of ecology, there's no reason why this cultural change will not take place. It would be great. We really do need policies. We need politics. We need strategies so that the strategy can take place. Thank you very much. Nicolas, did you want to say something? Yeah, I agree that strategy is very, very important. But as far as nuclear power is concerned, and in Italy, we have a stable government, which is good news for European politics. But we recently reopened that nuclear debate in Italy. And it's the first time for 40 years. And so we have already got some renewable production, 40% today of renewables. The rest, 60%, is generated by gas. So to decarbonize it between now and 2050, that's very, very important. So what technologies are going to allow that? What's an alternative to gas? Today we've got nuclear energy. The other condition for returning to nuclear energy in Italy is, of course, to use existing industrial rights, which are coal plants, which are due to be closed in a few years' time, and also we've got a gas power station which has another 20 years to live. So, which technologies can be used on those sites, 15 hectares of ground? It can't be the big EPR nuclear stations, but smaller stations, modular reactors that are 300, 400 megawatts in size, because the real question for us is acceptability. That means converting industrial sites using nuclear technologies. So that is at the heart of the debate for us in Italy. However, the government has got a long-term plan for national energy. We need a long-term energy plan. For the time being, up until now, Italy did not have one because every year we had a different government. But now we've got a stable government that has committed to identify a long-term energy strategy, and the strategy foresees 10%, in fact, 20% of programmable renewable energy, and half of that, i.e. 10%, is identified as being nuclear energy. The rest could be gas with CO2 capturing. So this would enable us to do this, technically speaking, and we would have reduced carbon energy. We've talked about stability being one of the key ingredients to move forward. We haven't really talked about financial capacity in that sector of industry. Human resources also. So are these components that you might be worried about for the future? So it's all very well deciding you want to take that path, but then you'll need finance and staffing levels, wouldn't you, as well? Well, if I could just come back first of all to that question of acceptability before we leave it. The reasons why political decisions have been taken in France and are accepted here is because we are not planning to open new nuclear sites. The next EPRs will be constructed on existing sites. And I think that was a political decision taken by the president, and that managed to calm down the debate of getting back into nuclear energy. Now, the conditions necessary for success. First of all, we have to make this industry attractive again to students. We want the number of engineers in nuclear engineering to increase, and that is going to happen. We're not there yet, however. I know that a lot of engineering schools and universities today are boosting their technology, their nuclear technology diplomas, and then businesses are ready to contribute to this effort as well, so that human beings are up to the challenge. Now, talking about finance, an EPR costs about 10 billion. 10 billion for an infrastructure that will live for at least 60 years. So I think in economic terms, it's a very positive effect on the economy. During COVID, we spent 100 billion, just to give you some perspective there. Nuclear is expensive, people say, but if you compare it with the positive aspects in terms of the cost of energy and structuring an industry and export, etc., I think the price-quality ratio is rather attractive. Xavier. At Neon, we do things a little bit differently. Our projects aren't as complex as what we've been talking about. We have powerful units that employ only 4 people, so we do need to recruit people, but the challenges are not as high as in Laurent's company. In terms of workforce, we've got about 10 or so people, and that's enough to satisfy our roadmap. But of course, it's a key subject for us. Like everybody, we want to have the right people in the right jobs. And so it's important to recruit and to have a good visibility. In terms of financial capacity, as I was saying earlier on, our sector, and at Neon in particular, we're not short of capital, and it's absolutely true because we're changing our main shareholder now. And we will be headed by Brookfield, which is an important backer. But the billions that Neon has already invested, even for a company such as ours, which was a small enterprise and then a small industry, this is a great subject, and we found backers, we found people who would lend money to us because it's an asset that is recognized as something which works well. We haven't had any trip-ups along the way, and we're heading in the right direction as far as society and the environment is concerned. So when you take a look today in France, the thing that's not moving forward are these authorizations. It's the administrative machinery which is too slow. And I don't mean to throw stones at anyone else that works for the government there, but the instructions change all the time. And so we are not short of expertise. We are not short of manpower. We are not short of all the rest. What we are lacking is a legal framework. And that's the sad thing. In France, we could do so much more. I think that we're in a climate which is accepting of nuclear energy now. There are some projects which have been blocked for good reason, but sometimes they are blocked for the wrong reasons. But and that's a real shame because we could all benefit. Could Europe step in? Nicolas. Yeah, I agree 100%. We do need regulatory stability. We need Europe to take into consideration all of the technologies that will reduce carbon footprints and be good for competitivity. A private company cannot fund a project that will be amortized 50 years down the line. That's just not possible. We need to have a regulatory framework with prices that are guaranteed by the state that will enable us to get long-term investment in nuclear power. The same thing for the development of all renewables. We need visibility in the medium and long terms of price. We are used today of having an electric system which works on the basis of variable prices and variable costs of the production of electricity, which today is determined by gas. Today, in Europe, prices, there are no variable costs. The costs are all fixed. And so we are heading towards a world, an energy world, which will be increasingly regulated. And Europe there has a basic, fundamental role to play there. Flora, you wanted to chime in here. Yeah, consensus on the theme of institutional positivity. So the right question could be, how do we get stability in the institutions? As you know, this Green Deal that was signed in 2019 was totally unknown to most of the French population. However, it's so vital to Europe. And it was a real achievement because 27 countries came to an agreement about their roadmap. That was some challenge, and it was pulled off. It was the first time, really. There was less than 1% of the French population that knew that the Green Deal actually existed. And they found out it existed, here in France at least, and it would be interesting to know what it was like in Italy. They found out about it during the European election campaign, and they learnt about it from people who were pointing the finger at the Green Deal, saying that we should get out of that. However, today, when you're wondering about how to bring about this cultural change, you do it with political leadership. And today's political leadership is nourished by institutional liquidity. So the politicians today wouldn't find any advantage to have this stability there. And that's why I say, I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, this is why I'm saying that this crisis is so deep. I'm not pessimistic at all. I would like to reiterate that the reconciliation in France of these energy sources has taken place in France, and it will be a win-win situation. I think this reconciliation took place in Europe also, and the proof of that is that at the beginning of 2024, there was an allegiance that was baptized between 11 countries. Not everybody agrees. Out of the 27, there are only 11 who've entered this nuclear alliance, but the others have allowed 11 countries to move forward on a joint nuclear strategy. That is proof of reconciliation. And the fact that this also went hand in hand with nuclear technology being considered as strategic by the European Union and in the European taxonomy, nuclear energy is an energy of transition. Well, this is all very concrete and very positive and encouraging. And sustainable? Yeah, totally. Because the majority at the European Parliament of the last 5 years, it was approved by European elections. So yes, I think that 5-year period to come will crown this stability and the implementation of choices in Europe that correspond perfectly to choices that different states are making in their respective jurisdictions. So I think we may have lost 3 or 4 years to arrive at this final conversation and get the taxonomy sorted out. I'd like to comment on Europe. I think Europe has a lot to contribute to regulations, but also in education. And I was sorry to see in 2022-2023 that Europe was a bit too much of an interventionist in terms of France. It was important at the time that people's bills didn't go through the roof, and I thought it was really saddening to see that in France we've got this energy shield. We were saying to people, don't worry, we'll put a cap on prices, but without explaining how it was happening. In countries such as Germany, people saw the real cost of energy, and the state sent out a check to compensate for the increase. So I think that's very revealing of the situation that we're all facing. France, of course, could protect its populations, of course, but it was rather saddening to note that in the French people's minds, they were saying, oh, well, and energies cost the same as it used to. Well, in fact, it was 100 billion euros that was spent to compensate. And a lot of money was taken to that end. So I would have liked Europe to have stepped in a little bit more and to tell France to do what Germany was doing, to explain to the population how energy is priced, what goes into the price, and explain where the money comes from, either from public finance or net contributors, which were renewable energies. I think that was a shame not to have explained that situation. Aude and Flora both want to chime in. I'd just like to come back very, very quickly, and then perhaps Aude, you could also speak. How do we reconcile people with the notion that energy is going to be more expensive? Because that's the message we're starting to hear now. And it's at the heart of the election campaign here in France. Let's mention that in your answers. Well, my answer is to do with the question that these signals are being sent out in terms of price. People can adjust as needed and see how we're going to see more and need more electricity. So you're going to have to adjust so that you don't buy stuff that is going to lose value overnight. You have to buy the right equipment at the right time. And if we had understood these signals during the Ukrainian crisis, that would have enabled households to start adjusting rather than receiving that signal which said, well, no matter what happens in the future, even if in the worst case scenario, whatever happens, you will always have the state who will be here to guarantee you energy, i.e. gas, energy that will be cheap and that you will always be able to afford. I think German households were paying the same as French households, although their energy was much more expensive. So that means, as Aude has said, they had learned how to invest in heat pumps and other energy-efficient devices. And in France, we haven't yet learnt that, which is a bit of a shame. Right now, there's a debate about should we decrease VAT on energy in France. I think you should address the situation differently, and it kind of hides the fact that renewables are deflationist. We need to reduce the cost of energy with wind turbines and solar panels. It's a shame that it's not integrated by the politicians because we have to realize that subsidies cost a lot of money. Let's tell those politicians that subsidies cost a lot of money. An EPR will cost 100 euros by a megawatt hour, which will increase prices, but renewables, you can't have 100% mix. You have a proportion in there. We'll have an intelligent mix. It's not which. And if we manage to encourage people to be a bit more frugal, it's not going to deliver efficiency, but it will be cost saving. But people need to be conscious of prices, they need to act in the right way, and they need to receive the right signals to know the reality. I'm fearful that there's not going to be enough time for questions from the room. Are there any hands going up there? Yes, there's a lady there at the back of the room wearing red, and then there's a second question which we can perhaps also take. Hello. I'm in the 21 committee. and I've been working on this subject for a long time. I would just like to say something, excuse me, this isn't a question, but I've heard things said up there on the stage which are not accurate, despite the quality of the speakers. Yes, it seems that there is some kind of consensus because we're not in the nitty-gritty of the subject. We've not started to construct these nuclear plants. You're right to say that they are going to be on land on which power plants already stood. However, let's wait and see. Second point, when you are talking about taxonomy in Europe, it's true that it has been accepted that nuclear is a transition energy, but you know, and I need not say much more about it, that this has been a discussion between several countries, Austria and Germany in particular, and France had to make a lot of concessions on subjects which we weren't expecting. Thirdly, when you say that nuclear energy, and I'm not against nuclear energy, I really want to underline that, but with global warming, I think we're going to have 40 more years of nuclear energy, but not 300 more years. When you say that it's a stable energy, all you need is Putin to misaim his missile, and you've got another Chernobyl on your hands. And it's not totally unimaginable, as you know. So if there is consensus at the moment, it's because we've been battered around the head about this subject, and there's been an absolutely mind-boggling commission at the National Assembly here in France, where the MPs asked the entire world, i.e. 4 prime ministers, 2 presidents, all kinds of experts, they have to be in that committee. And if, at the end of that committee, if we had renewed the governments a little bit, we would have been better off. So I think we ought to be more nuanced. I think that in coming years, in Europe, we will be behind in terms of renewables. We're already behind, actually. And in the landscape, the energy landscape, we are behind here in lands. I'm for a mix. I think we really do have to include nuclear energy. But if we don't, we will lose our expertise here. And my final thing I want to say, an apology for hogging the mic here, but, oh, okay, no, that's it. I'll stop there. Well, I agree with everything you've said. We should have invited you onto the panel. There's another question there. There's a lady wearing blue. It's perhaps... Oh, no, we want a question. I know the story of this energy station. I've studied the energy industry. The fact that it hasn't yet exploded, it's the most important, the most modern one in Europe, but it hasn't blown up yet. Because after Chernobyl, we thought about it carefully. And with everything that's happening today, which hasn't yet exploded, I think that proves that if you use nuclear energy correctly, you'll even be able to resist and withstand Putin. Well, thank you very much for contributing that. Well, bombs perhaps, but what about cyber attacks? I'm not so sure about that. Have we got a final question from the floor for our speakers? There's a lady in white.
Thank you. I'm a normal citizen. In nuclear power, but I have a question too, but I also would like to share with you a small, short case. I'm from Finland, and in 2005, Finland started its latest nuclear power plant project with Areva, a French nuclear power plant company. And it was meant to be completed in 2009, but it was delayed, it was complicated, so it was completed 13 years delayed. We only took it in use last year, and it costed 8 billion euros to Areva, and I have to thank everyone here because we were told that French citizens, taxpayers, paid a big part of that money. So thank you for the nuclear power plant. And the second, my question is about, you haven't talked at all about the final disposal of the nuclear waste.
Good question, because we were meant to ask it and we did not.
Yeah, and in Finland, actually, we as the third in the world, we have now started this process, and I'm a member of the family business and we are involved in, so I'm a little bit informed of that. So are you trusting Finnish bedrock for your nuclear waste? Because now it's pending. Thank you very much.
En une minute, parce qu'on a atteint notre temps de...
We've just got one more minute. Aude, I think this is your specialist field, but anyone else feel free to contribute. Yeah, Finland and Sweden are trailblazers in terms of burying nuclear waste. France is also up in the front runners. We've got a site in Bure which is undergoing construction, or we're asking for a permit. And the construction will be until 2027, and the pilot industrial phase will be around 2027. There is a solution exists to work with existing nuclear waste, i.e. not which is being currently created. We could talk about energy for a whole lifetime. Thank you very much to the audience for being here. Thank you very much to our panel members as well. Enjoy the end of the meeting.